his skin was in bad shape, and he was forced to have lips. It was sad for most of his fans to witness.
What really happened to Frankie Lymon? He was a teenage star with a big voice, but his life ended too soon. How did he go from fame to tragedy? Frankie died 57 years ago, but now new secrets about his life are coming out. Was he a victim of the music industry? Did his success bring him trouble? His story is full of mystery, heartbreak, and lessons that people are just now learning.
Baby, baby, how I want you, baby, baby.
Frankie and the Teenagers were the prototype for today's boy bands. The star was snatched from the slums of Harlem at the age 13 and catapulted into national prominence. Frankie was born in New York in a poor neighborhood. His family did not have much money, but they had music.
He was just a natural born talent. He was born for the stage. And it only lasted a short time, which I guess will plague me the rest of my life.
His parents were part of a gospel group, and his brothers also loved to sing. Growing up in Harlem was not easy. Life was tough, and kids had to grow up fast. Frankie was no different. In an interview, he once said that by the time he was 11, he was already doing things most grown men did. There was no time to be a child because survival came first.
We sang on that corner every day of the week, all day long. Grocery store where Frankie worked, the window above of the store Richard Barrett lived in. He lived in that apartment.
Even as a young boy, Frankie worked to help his family. At just 10 years old, he had a job at a small grocery store in his neighborhood. While other kids were outside playing games, Frankie was busy trying to make money. He said he helped pay the rent with his earnings. Life in his neighborhood was rough, and people had to do whatever it took to get by. Frankie even admitted that as a young boy, he was involved in things most children should never experience. He once talked about how, at just 10 years old, he made money by bringing men to women who worked as prostitutes. He said that when white men came to Harlem looking for black women, he would help them find someone. In return, he would get paid a commission. Sometimes they would even give him extra money or gifts. This was a shocking thing for a child to be involved in, but it showed how fast Frankie had to grow up. Even with all these struggles, music was always a part of Frankie's life. He sang in church and even learned to play the drums. He loved music and knew it was his true passion. One day he saw a group of kids performing at a school talent show. The group was called the Coudaville, and they were a mix of black and Puerto Rican kids who sang doo-wop. Frankie was amazed by their music and wanted to join them. He begged them for months to let him in. At first they said no, but Frankie did not give up. Just before he turned 13, they finally said yes. He was so excited to be part of the group. They changed their name several times. First they called themselves the Premiers, then the Harmonies, but the name that stuck was the Teenagers.
Now, no one knew in the group, at least I didn't know, that was the Richard Barrett of the Valentines, who later came to our rehearsal in Stitt Junior High School, where we went, and liked us so much that he took us down to the same recording company where he was making records.
Frankie was not the lead singer at first. He was just a backup singer in a group called the Teenagers. At that time, Lymon was in 8th grade, and the rest of the group were a little older. They all grew up in New York in the early 1950s. Back then, kids loved singing on street corners. It was their way of getting noticed. Doo-wop music was very popular, just like rap music is today. Every day the Teenagers would sing at the grocery store with Frankie. They would also sing on street corners, harmonizing together. Sometimes the neighbors got annoyed and called the police on them. Frankie's mother would yell at him, telling him it was time to come home. But the group didn't stop singing. They wanted to be famous. One day, a well-known singer named Richard Barnett from a group called the Valentines moved to their neighborhood. The Teenagers saw this as a big chance. They sang for him, hoping to impress him. Barnett was shocked by how good they were. He liked their voices so much that he took them to audition for a record label called G Records.
I asked him, I said, I want you to record these kids for me, do two sides. He said, no kids, I don't want the problem with the school board, the business, just the whole business. I said, all right, I can understand it.
At first, the record company didn't want to sign them. They thought the kids were too young and they worried about problems with the school board. But when the owner, George Goldner, heard Frankie's voice, he changed his mind. He said that as long as Frankie was the lead singer, they had a deal. Since the group was underage, their parents had to sign the contract for them. They had 3 lawyers go over the deal. The kids got a small allowance, and the rest of the money went into a trust fund that they could access when they turned 21.
I walked away and I got back uptown. I said, how can I tell these kids you don't want to record them because they're too young? They sing, they're in show business. As far as I was concerned, they had a talent. And then we made a deal. I'll rehearse your group, George, if you record mine.
Frankie and the Teenagers had a sound that was fresh and exciting. Their group style later inspired Motown groups like the Jackson 5. Their first hit song was originally called Why Do the Birds Sing So Gay, but the record company wanted a different name. So Frankie and one of the members, Herman Santiago, worked on the lyrics and renamed it Why Do Fools Fall in Love. This detail became important later because some members of the group never got paid for their work.
Tell me why.
The song's lyrics came from an interesting story. The Teenagers used to sing in the hallways of their apartment building. One day, a man came out of his apartment and got annoyed. He told them, "I'm tired of hearing the same song every day." He gave them a poem he had written called Why Do the Birds Sing So Gay? The group took some of his words, changed the song a little, and turned it into Why Do Fools Fall in Love? They wrote the song while they were still in school, working on it during lunch breaks. The song became a huge success. It reached #1 on the Billboard charts and was also a hit in the UK. Frankie and the Teenagers became wildly popular. Young girls would gather outside their neighborhood, hoping to see them. Soon they were performing all over the country. They became the first real crossover group, meaning they had fans from all backgrounds, black, white, Hispanic. Everyone loved them. Also, Frankie also became close with Zola Taylor, a singer from another famous group, the Platters. They had a romantic relationship even though she was older than him.
Why do birds sing so gay?
Frankie was not interested in teenage girls like many thought. In an interview, he once said he didn't like screaming teenage fans because they didn't know anything about life. He preferred women who were 25 or older. He thought they were less trouble and more rewarding. But because his managers wanted him to have a clean image, he had to keep his love life a secret. To avoid a scandal, he would introduce his older girlfriends as his mother or older sister. This way, people wouldn't ask questions. Frankie's first serious romance in show business was with a nightclub dancer. She later went on tour with him, pretending to be his mother. Frankie once talked about how they met. He said it happened at a party when he was performing in Los Angeles. The woman, who was beautiful, walked up to him, pinched his cheek, and said, "Oh, isn't he cute?" Frankie responded, "You're not so bad yourself, baby. You sure look good to me." She was shocked and told him not to talk to his elders like that, but Frankie asked her out to breakfast after her last show. That night he bought some scotch and took her to his room. In the world of show business, gossip spreads fast. Soon Frankie had women in many cities. He nearly got caught when a newspaper reporter noticed something strange. The reporter had met one of Frankie's mothers in New York. Then in Chicago, he was introduced to another mother. The problem was, they looked nothing alike. Frankie had to work hard to convince the reporter that he had seen the same woman in both cities. Frankie had relationships, but they did not last either. In 1961, he met Elizabeth Waters, and they got married in 1964. They had a baby, but the child died after just 2 days. The pain was too much, and their marriage fell apart. He later moved to Los Angeles and reconnected with a woman named Zona Taylor, whom he had known since he was 13. She loved him so much that she let him stay in her home and spend her money, but his drug use ruined everything. He even had a wedding with her in Mexico, but it did not last. When Frankie was in the Army, he was stationed at Fort Gorton in Georgia. It was there that he met a school teacher named Mia Eagle. Even though he was supposed to be serving in the military, he often ran away from his base without permission. This is called going AWOL, which means he deserted his duty. Instead of staying in the Army, Frankie would sneak out and sing at local bars. The Army did not tolerate this behavior, so he was given a dishonorable discharge. Despite his troubles, Frankie found love again. He met a woman named Amira, a school teacher who became his third and final wife. During this time, he tried to live a clean and stable life. However, his past habits and lifestyle made it hard for him to stay on the right path. He soon got involved with a man named Sam Bray, who helped him sign a deal with Big Apple Records. This was Frankie's chance to start fresh in the music world. Frankie was married for only 8 months when he made a big decision. With his wife's support, he moved to New York City to chase his dream of making a comeback in music. He decided to stay with his grandmother in Harlem while he focused on recording music. He did not want to end up like other former child stars such as Shirley Temple or Jackie Coogan, who had struggled after early fame. Frankie wanted to prove that he could still be a star, but people around him were worried. Frankie's managers saw that he was the most popular member of his group, the Teenagers. They wanted him to go solo. A man named George Goldner, who helped manage the group, started scheduling solo shows for Frankie. This caused problems between Frankie and the other members of the Teenagers. While they were touring Europe, Goldner sold his part of the record company, G Records, to a man named Morris Levy. Levy was connected to the mob. Around this time, Frankie and one of the other members, Santiago, wrote a song together, but Frankie was the only one getting attention in interviews. The other members felt ignored. Frankie had started singing alone. Goldner even recorded a song called Miracle in the Rain with Frankie as the only singer. He replaced the Teenagers with another unknown group to do background vocals, but when the song was released, the label still said Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. This upset the group. They felt like Frankie had betrayed them. While they were still on tour in Europe, they started arguing. Some members even got into fistfights and threatened to stop performing. When they returned to the United States, the situation got worse. One day they had a big argument and Frankie decided to leave the group. The remaining members of the Teenagers tried to continue without him. They thought they could succeed as a smaller group, but things didn't go well for them. Levy had managed to break them apart while also making sure they did not get paid fairly. The young boy who had once begged for a chance to sing had now become the biggest star of them all. Around this time, someone took advantage of him. Morris Levy, a record executive, tricked him into selling his music rights for only $1,500. That music later made millions, but Frankie never got to see any of that money. He had no idea how valuable his work really was, meaning Frankie never received the royalties he was owed. When Myra, his last wife, asked Levy for her fair share, he refused. He told her that Frankie had 2 other wives, and he took the case to court. After a long legal fight, Myra won and received close to $1 million in unpaid royalties. In today's money, that amount would be much more. The other members of the Teenagers who had helped write Why Do Fools Fall in Love also tried to get their share of the money. Unfortunately, they lost their case because of a rule called the Statute of Limitations, which meant too much time had passed for them to make a legal claim. As a result, Morris Levy walked away with millions of dollars, money that should have gone to Frankie and his group. In September 1957, Frankie officially left the Teenagers and started his solo career. His first solo hit was My Girl, which got him a record deal.
There's no other girl in the whole wide world than my girl.
Then he had another hit with Goody Goody.
Oh, you met someone to set you back on your heels. Goody, goody.
He even performed the song on The Ed Sullivan Show, which was a huge TV show at the time. This was a big moment for him. Even though he had left his group behind, Frankie was now shining on his own. But his story was just beginning. So Frankie caused a big scandal on live TV. He was performing on a show called The Big Beat, hosted by famous DJ Alan Freed. While singing with his group, Frankie started dancing with a white girl. This might not seem like a big deal today, but back then, America was still deeply divided by race. Many white people, especially in the southern states, were angry about black and white people mixing, even in something as simple as a dance. The reaction was immediate. TV stations in the South were so upset that they refused to air the show. The network, ABC, didn't want to deal with the trouble, so just weeks after the dance, The Big Beat was canceled. It only lasted 4 episodes. The ABC bosses didn't want to fight against racist attitudes, so they gave in to the pressure and shut the show down. Alan Freed, the man who gave many black artists a chance to perform on TV, also faced problems. After the incident, he was criticized heavily. People judged him for supporting black musicians and for allowing an interracial dance to be shown on television. He often dressed in colorful outfits that stood out, like bright tuxedos and plaid sport coats. But this did not save him. ABC eventually fired him, and his career suffered because of his support for black artists.
He just didn't have the voice. They would have to change the key maybe 5 notes down, and it would sound horrible. So when Frankie did things on TV, he would always lip sync towards the end.
Frankie Lymon was a star at a young age, but he was not ready to be a solo act. The people around him didn't realize that he was not strong enough to make it on his own. When he left the group, the Teenagers, they tried to move on without him. They got a new lead singer and released a song called Flip Flop. Just like the name, the song flopped. That was the end of the Teenagers. They were out of show business. Frankie Lymon stayed in the business longer, but his fame faded because of his personal problems and bad management. Frankie had a lot of issues. The public saw him as a sweet and innocent teenager, but the truth was very different. Behind the scenes, he was dealing with big problems. He was addicted to drugs and had a wild lifestyle that was too much for someone so young. He started using marijuana when he was just a child. By the time he got into show business at 15, he was already using hard drugs like heroin. The way he was introduced to it was heartbreaking. A woman almost twice his age gave him his first taste. He learned to use a needle at a party in New York, where many musicians were taking drugs. At first, he just pricked his skin to get a small effect. He thought he could control it, but soon he started injecting it into his veins. He later said, "I never meant to get addicted. I knew it was bad. At first, I was okay with just skin popping, but when I got brave, I started shooting it straight into my veins."
There would be a time in his later years when he would have been able to understand what he was doing and what his worth was, but nobody was going to stop and tell him then. They were too busy taking his money from him. Who's going to tell you what you're worth if they're putting it in their own pockets? You follow me?
As Frankie's drug addiction got worse, his record sales dropped. When the public found out he was an addict, his career was over. Even though many people in the music industry were using drugs, they were in powerful positions and could hide it. Frankie, still a teenager, couldn't. It was even worse for him because his voice was changing. No one wanted to help him grow into his new voice. They only wanted him as the young boy with the high voice. By the time he was 17, no one in the industry wanted to work with him. He was banned from nightclubs, ignored by booking agents, and shut out by record companies. There was another reason Frankie struggled in the music industry. In the 1950s, most people only heard music on the radio or records. Many did not know what singers looked like. Because of this, some white fans did not realize Frankie Lymon was black. When he appeared on national TV, the reaction was shocking. Some white viewers were confused, and TV executives were nervous. They even had police present in case of trouble, but Frankie stayed professional and performed like a star.
Now he's about this tall. When he was this tall, he had his first $1 million love. Tell me, ooh, baba, ooh, baba, ooh, baba, ooh, baba, why do fools fall in love? Talking about the one, the only, the great rockaway now, Frankie Lymon!
By 1960, Frankie tried to fight his addiction. He had some bad influences in his life, but one man tried to help. Bob Redcross, his road manager for a while, acted like a father figure to him. Frankie said, "Bob told me about other entertainers who died because of drugs. He knew them personally. He made me move into his house on Long Island so he could watch over me. He wanted to make sure I wasn't sneaking drugs."
He just didn't have the voice. They would have to change the key maybe 5 notes down, and it would sound horrible. So when Frankie did things on TV, he would always lip sync towards the end.
But the industry was moving on without him. He tried to get clean by going to rehab, but it was not easy. He kept going back to heroin.
He was missing a tooth, his skin was in bad shape, and he was forced to have lip sync. It was sad for most of his fans to witness.
In 1965, he tried to get back together with his old band, the teenagers, but it did not work. People were not interested anymore. He looked for new opportunities and signed short-term deals with record companies, but nothing lasted. The music world had changed, and there was no place for him. As time passed, Frankie struggled to find work. His friends saw him begging for jobs. He would go to booking offices, hoping someone would give him a chance, but people barely recognized him anymore. He had been a star once, but now he was just another man trying to survive. It was painful to see. Some of his old friends said he used to be full of confidence, but after losing his voice, he became a different person. He was no longer the same Frankie they knew. By 1965, he made his last TV appearance, and it was clear he was in bad shape. He had lost a tooth and his skin looked unhealthy. The drugs had taken a serious toll on his body. He walked the streets of New York looking for old friends who might lend him money. He needed cash to buy more heroin. He even slept on subway trains because he had nowhere else to go. People who once cheered for him no longer recognized him.
In 1955, 5 young friends from the Washington Heights section of New York went into a recording studio and changed the sound of pop music forever. Led by a 13-year-old singing and dancing dynamo, Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers added a rock and roll beat to the doo-wop sound and brought vocal harmony singing into the modern age.
A few months before his death, Frankie gave what would be his final interview. He confidently told the world that he had beaten his addiction and that people would soon believe in him again. He said he didn't care if others doubted him because he knew he was finally clean. He was willing to wait for the world to see the truth. But unfortunately, the people who doubted him turned out to be right. One day, a young boy in Frankie's neighborhood told his brother, Lou, that he had heard Frankie was dead. Lou did not believe it. He had already heard rumors of his brother's death before, so he brushed it off as another false story. But since he was close to his grandmother's house, he decided to stop by and joke about it with her. When he arrived, he saw a policeman and another official from the local housing project. This time it was no joke. His brother Frankie was really gone. Frankie had used heroin to celebrate getting back into the music industry. The day before he was supposed to record a new song, he was found dead in his grandmother's bathroom, holding a syringe. He was only 25 years old. He died alone, broke, and forgotten by many. By the time the 1980s arrived, 2 other members of his teenage singing group had also passed away. Frankie's story became just another sad tale of a young star lost to drugs. However, even after his death, his troubles were not over. Frankie had never legally divorced any of his wives, which caused a huge battle over his money. After his death, his name in music became valuable, and his estate was worth millions. But the big question was, who would get his money? His song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, was still making a lot of money from commercials and other uses. However, Frankie himself never saw any of the money from his hit songs while he was alive.